the chairperson of the Department of Africana Studies at Tennessee State University. And of course, Dr. Al-Hadid, before we had our break, and of course we are sorry that we had to interrupt you for that break, but let's allow you to continue this economic discussion because I think what you're doing is pointing out the significance of the international slave trade in terms of the economic development of in terms of capitalism. Let's do it from that perspective.
Yeah, what we have to realize is that the slave trade set the stage for the Industrial Revolution and modern-day capitalism, because in the feudal period, the feudal landlords were the ones that had the wealth, and they had a system of barter. Now, the merchant classes were not the most wealthy people, nor were they a part of the royal families, so that the venture capitalists invested in the slave trade, accumulated their wealth, and in Manchester, England in 1750, when they started the first Industrial Revolution, these people were able to invest in that project. And then the way they socialized that Industrial Revolution was to form factories so that the center of power shifted from the rural areas where the feudal landlords were to the urban areas. And the same exact phenomenon happened inside the United States. A lot of people think that Lincoln freed the slaves for humanitarian reasons. Lincoln freed the slaves because the United States was moving from a feudal economy into an industrial economy. And they needed people to come into the labor force with a wage so that they could expand the markets to sell the products that were being produced. So there is a direct link between the Industrial Revolution and modern-day capitalism and slavery. Modern-day capitalism and the Industrial Revolution would not have been possible in the Western world without slavery in the form that it took. You're talking about chattel slavery, where the people were not paid a wage, and all that money that they did not pay to the slaves, they invested, they accumulated wealth. So when the technology came along, there were people who could invest in that technology.
You know, I think when we were in college, Dr. Al-Hadid, we used to talk about slavery from that perspective, and we would say that slavery was simply anachronistic in a real sense. It was in the wrong place at the wrong time. You see, and it was time for it to go, and yeah, I certainly support that point of view, and I can see that point of view. You know, during this last 3 minutes that we have here, let's look at some of the efforts that you've already talked about when you dealt with Marcus Garvey, but some of the efforts that will attempt to bring all of the various Africans from the various continents, North America, South America, Caribbean, Canada, etc. What are some of the efforts that are being made and that have been made to do that? Let's do that over the last 3 or 4 minutes that we have.
One of, I think, most ongoing project is, of course, the various Africana studies, African American studies departments and programs that we have across the country. What we're trying to do now is understand the African-centered paradigm and to put together an intellectual project where we connect Africans up with the same knowledge base and with the same culture, because we realize without a paradigm and without a shared ideology, it will be impossible to bring all Africans together. And it's important that we bring all Africans together because capitalism, the way it's set up today, is an international situation. And one example I can show you of how independence came to South Africa, it was the fact that African Americans inside of this country put pressure on this government, put sanctions against South Africa, imposed sanctions on U.S. corporations that invested in South Africa, that set the stage for that apartheid regime to get weaker and weaker, and then the revolutionary forces in South Africa could move forward to take the government as they have done and to develop it along the lines of majority rule as opposed to the white supremacy, which was at that time was minority rule inside of that country. So I think that was a very strong effort. Another thing, if you go back to Garvey, Garvey carried the movement through the 1920s. And then Elijah Muhammad, and his mentor was Master Farad Muhammad, took up the movement in the 1930s, and they just continued that Pan-African idea. Kwame Nkrumah, who was a student here at Lincoln University, read the ideas of Garvey. He was a student here from 1935 to 1945. He went back to Ghana, joined the liberation movement at the Convention of the People's Party, and liberated, helped to liberate what was then called the Gold Coast in 1957. Formed the country of Ghana, and immediately he started talking about Pan-Africanism. and he served to provide resources and training for other African countries to liberate themselves from British colonialism, French colonialism, Portuguese colonialism. He provided the technology, he educated the people. So that whole spirit of Pan-Africanism, and from that they formed the Organization of African Unity in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and that provided an umbrella structure for Africans to at least move toward unifying. And I think today what we see with the celebration of programs, holidays such as Kwanzaa, which started by Marlon King in 1966, we're trying to now rediscover our culture and make a genuine connection with Africa from a cultural point of view. And we also have a lot of religions that are reaching back to Africa. Say in the Christian community, you have the Imani Temple, started by Archbishop George Stallings, and the Shrine of the Black Madonna. All of these groups are trying to take Christianity and connect it back to the African continent. The same thing is being done in the Islamic community, where we're trying to reconnect with Africa and the Muslim world through that whole Pan-African concept.
Well, Dr. Al-Hadid, let me thank you, let me thank you for coming by and giving us that excellent information about the African in the New World, the Pan-African movement, and all of that excellent information that you've given us. And I'm sure that our listeners will have a better understanding of the African in the New World. And let me encourage our listeners to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.